Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Better Managers Briefing. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of the CMI, and each Friday at this time, we bring you views on the management topics that matter. Now, today, I'm delighted to have as my guest Rupert McNeil, who is the government's Chief People Officer. So welcome to you, Rupert. Lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us. So, Rupert, how has COVID impacted your thoughts on how the civil service needs to adapt, and what shifts in management and leadership have you observed, and how do you think they'll change the civil service in the future?
Well, it's really interesting, Anne. It's been an absolutely fascinating time. And if I sort of put in a bit of context, if we go back to around 2010, when a big wave of civil service, public service reform was started by the coalition government, you can see a sort of a 5-year period up to 2015 when some fairly fundamental things were being laid down, looking at how we do commercial work, digital work, how we think about policy and other things. And that was linked to what had been happening in other parts of industry in the UK and elsewhere in global organizations, where you had the sort of the departmental, for us, they're government policy departments and delivery departments, equivalent to business divisions, if you like. And what government was going through was almost moving towards the matrix, with the putting in place of functions, finance, HR, IT, commercial, etc. And that then really accelerated further over the course of 2016 to 2020, with an even more bedding down of those relationships, people feeling themselves, yes, I'm part of a department, but I'm also part of a function or a profession. Mm-hmm. And I sort of view them as S-curves, so the first S-curve. And all that was improving civil service effectiveness. Now, during that time, we had the referendum on the European Union and the exercise to leave the European Union. And that was the first big wave of change. It was a big accelerator. It put into practice much more, I would say, collaborative working between departments, using the functional model, which was a very important agent of that. And then also allowing us to do things we hadn't done before, move people around government much more easily, for example. Think very much about the planning, because everything in government happens in the public sector, actually, compared, in my experience, I'm a relative newbie in the public sector. I joined in 2015, is highly transparent. Your resources are very clear. The accountability is very clear. And all of that combined with what the functions were giving, with the focus that EU transition gave, meant that lots of capabilities had to improve. Now, that then was all happening. We're now in 2020 and sort of at the start of a new S-curve, which was focusing on things like automation, I would say, where we are based within the UK, another big factor, use of technology, the increasing integration between functional areas, between the technology and operations and finance, etc. But EU transition had prepared us for the next big shock, which was COVID. Yeah. And COVID has been, like EU transition, a massive accelerant, I think, to increasing collaboration, how we think about capability in the civil service. If I take one small thing, which everyone on this call will have experienced, I really think, I vary on how I describe this. So this is how I'm describing it this Friday, is that, maybe I think about 16 years of change in how we think about the workplace has happened in about 6 months.
Absolutely.
And it's so we need to, and that means we need to go back and look at our plans, even down to the levels of workplace occupancy, office occupancy level, what we're assuming, how do we think about productivity, what support do people need. So a fascinating time. But if I pick one word, it will be actually acceleration in the direction we were already going.
And that's a great descriptor. And I've had others, including this year's gold medal winner, David Roberts, the vice chair of the NHS. He refers to COVID as the great accelerator. And exactly your point, everything has been speeded up. But if we reflect a little bit on management and leadership, now you recently became a CMI companion and you underwent the chartered assessment. What did you great? What did you learn about your own leadership, and how do you think your civil servants might benefit from reflecting on their own leadership and management styles?
Yeah, so I thought it was a great process. So I had the CMI standard and the code, which is sort of the what and the how, if you like, complement each other very well. They're very well judged documents in terms of and well judged expressions of what we should expect from leaders at multiple levels. And I would use the word, Anne, reflections. I think that to me is what it is. It's a very effective mirror. And I did a piece on this, which I put up on LinkedIn, because I was very struck by, I've got two professional bodies where I need to stick with, need to fulfill my CPD obligations, CIPD and CIMA, and now CMI.
Yes,
they mesh really well together. And actually, the very fact that you're required to, you can have the sugar and the flour and the eggs, but to mix them all together in the cake of your CPD and to look at it not as three separate things, but as one integrated thing in your multifaceted role is really good. I hoped you weren't going to ask me which was my favorite part of the standard.
Go ahead. What's your favorite part?
What is your favorite part of the standard? Today, my favorite part of the standard is I think the part that talks about really helping develop others. I think that's really a great former boss of mine said, two of the things that you do as a leader is you set context and you develop your people. And
absolutely.
That it sort of captures that nicely. And then the other point is, it's in a way it's an embodiment of the great. And by the way, I think if you do the CMI, it's really good for preparing for interviews, I think, because you know that interview question, which is, but in this thing that you've just described that you're involved in, what did you do?
Exactly.
That's very much in there in terms of, well, actually, we want to know about what you did in implementing the strategy and delivering it. So no, I was a big fan. We're going to use, we're already through our operational delivery profession in government, as we look at the professions and look at our new curriculum approach, of which more will be coming out in the next few months. We are very keen to use the external standards. CMI is an important one for us. The other professional bodies have them as well, and we've developed our own. Yeah.
And it's great, and thank you. I think self-awareness is a key attribute of good managers and leaders, and that reflection drives that self-awareness. The other thing I would say, and I'm a big fan of the British chartered professions. They're a British USP. And, it's great to see them being made use of. They're incredibly well respected internationally. It's great to see them being used here domestically. And by the way, if you want to ask Rupert a question, please just put it in the chat. We will get to questions. But first, there's been a lot of change recently in the civil service, some new faces, a new chief of staff, a new head of the civil service, and a lot of talk of civil service reform. What cultural changes do you think might happen, and what would you like to see, and why?
Well, I think you've got a number. If I sort of pick out two themes for me from what's said, and all this is you can infer and read all this in the public domain. So the first reference point is the Chancellor Duchy of Lancaster, Michael Gove's speech to the Ditchley Foundation, which is I think if anyone's interested, they should have a look at that, because he talks about the importance of the level of capability in the civil service, and making sure that at all levels people have the skills that they need. It's very interesting. We're at a point where there is very high alignment, I think, partly generated by the process of leaving the European Union, but even more accelerated by COVID, about, you know, what do we actually need, and skill-wise and capability-wise, and also much more about the porosity between the public sector, other parts of the public service, whether it's the military or local government, and what happens in the civil service. We're all part. I think it's much easier to think of ourselves as all parts of the public service. Interesting too. So my wife went back to university a few years ago, only a few years ago, to read English, and so she taught me the word synecdoche. I think that's how it's pronounced, where one word is a part is used to symbolise the whole. I think that's the right definition. And we use Whitehall for government. Well, Whitehall is not Whitehall. The civil service is all over the UK and other parts of the world, and it's only one part of a much broader, richer public sector, which, if you're dealing with things like EU transition or COVID, all of it gets involved and mobilised, as well as all citizens. So anyway, Ditchley is about capability in public service. It's a very, very powerful vision, and we're trying to realise that vision now through our new curriculum unit, looking at the tiers. What does every civil servant need to know? What do you need to know in the profession? What do you need to know because you're in the health context, or the education context, or the defence and security context? So that's information which people will see, and we hope we'll produce stuff that others outside government can make use of as well. That's one thing, capability, big thing.
Yeah.
Second thing is just the relentless focus on outcomes.
Yeah.
And how do you describe outcomes at the system level, and then translate those down to what happens at the business unit level? Now, that's really fascinating in the context of CMI, and I'm sure many people will have this, because one of the things that interests me most is the tension at different levels in the system, because you've got people at the front line who, particularly in organizations that serve the customer directly, but really any organization, who really know how the business is done. And they're the people you should be consulting with and asking in a systems thinking context about what needs to be done, and training them up and listening to what they say and need about what the customer needs. And then you've got the very top of the shop, which in the corporate context is worried about the share price, and the result is actually quite, it's complex and rich, but it's quite narrow. The tension between those two places is held by the managers in the middle of the organization.
Absolutely.
And that's a really pressured, hard place to be. Made easier in some senses by technology, but not necessarily, because actually technology gives you more frequent data to absorb. You've got to be really good at distinguishing the signal from the noise and all of that. So it's really, really interesting. So, and again, I think on both of those things, capability and outcomes, the civil service, the bits that that I'm involved in, the civil service as a whole, it's sort of a sector. It has all sorts of organisations within it, of different sizes, doing very different activities. But you see these common themes, and capability and outcomes, I think, are and outcomes for the citizen is what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And, you're absolutely right to highlight the critical role that middle managers play in taking that strategy and then translating it down into outcomes that everybody in the organization can understand. And I think that's incredibly important. Now, we just did a major piece of research, Management Transformed, and it did show us that clarity of communication, and if you like, focus on outcomes, is incredibly important. That's the most important attribute of a good manager: clear communication, and leading the team with clear objectives. But it also showed us that as much as people value flexible working, they're also incredibly concerned about well-being, and that many people are struggling with their well-being at this moment in time. So what advice do you give your managers and leaders in the civil service on how to boost their well-being and keep their motivation going in this marathon crisis?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So if I could answer it from several directions, Anne. So the first one is I'm really interested in the concept of resilience and what that means. And I do have a worry that we talk about individual resilience which in a sense puts the burden of something that is a symptom of a system onto the individual. We expect you, individual X, to be more resilient. We're going to train you to be more resilient, when actually we could make changes in the system that would make that less of an issue. So, are we assuming the agency is in the right place? Of course, and individuals need to feel empowered to say, actually, I'm going to stop now.
Yeah.
So there's a really the Yelp-Dodson effect curve that shows that, as performance increases with pressure up to a point, but then it drops off very quickly, is at the heart of this. You can break your system very quickly if you're putting too much strain on any component, including the people in it. So that's something that we should all be very aware of. Interesting looking at the emergency services, what happens in hospital ERs, what happens in the armed forces, security services. They're very aware of this, and they've got lots of mechanisms to do that, to rotate people out, to make sure they're not exposed for too long. And those are all things which I think we need to be very cognizant of. I mean, I've talked elsewhere. In 2014, I had to take time off work. Call it, in old money terms, a nervous breakdown. That was a combination of, and I was off for a couple of months. I took the time out. I said, I've got to do this to get myself better. It was a multifaceted issue of some aspects of the workplace, lots of aspects of my genetics, lots of aspects of my the way I was sleeping, eating, caffeining, all those things, and they got sort of reset. You've got to give people the time and space to look after themselves,
absolutely,
families, and then keep people in the right context. So we're looking very closely at that. One of the things which we've really benefited from is the work that Martin Seligman did in the US, first of all with the US Armed Forces, which led to the PERMA framework, which if people Google it, you'll see what it says. It's very good. Our performance dashboards, our people surveys now measure that, so we can see on an enduring basis whether our organizational health and resilience is going up or going down.
Well, I think that's great. And thank you for being so honest in talking about your own mental health. And I think that it's really important that we are honest about that. And, when leaders are willing to themselves be vulnerable, they inspire trust. And we know that inspiring trust is critical to driving up productivity. So thank you for sharing that with us. And we'll be sure to put a link into that framework when we write up our discussion.
Your report, that report, everyone should read that report on Management Transformed. It's really excellent and actually so interesting because it just reinforces that we just need to keep doing what we knew was the right thing to do.
It is, one of my guests, Andrew Hill, he described it as, this crisis has removed all the paraphernalia of management that we maybe didn't need, right? All the unnecessary meetings and the bureaucracy and, the unnecessary instances and revisions and reports. And so that we just get back to the basics of being human and looking after each other and getting stuff done, right? Yeah. And I think that's kind of what you're saying here. And I think it's great. Now, of course, another keen topic that we address in Management Transformed is, the huge importance of diversity and inclusion in our workplaces. And actually, ironically, we have seen many workplaces become more inclusive. That's what people are telling us. But the importance of diversity and inclusion has dropped for many colleagues. How do you plan to make sure that being more diverse and inclusive is remaining front and center in the civil service? Well,
so it's something that we're looking at all the time. Now, one of the points from an HR process or people process perspective is if you're getting it right for everybody, you're getting it right for everybody. so you're optimizing your processes. So you can look at a process which is generating a disproportionate weighting to white middle-aged males won't be working because that's clearly your aperture isn't wide enough. Something is happening in your process which isn't right. When you see differences you want the lived experience in the organization to be great for everybody. So look for those where it's less great and try and address those. So I think that's an important point. So there's no conflict. It's completely supportive and actually, again, an accelerant, and one that gets people very very interested. I think we have been making the journey to, so it's about fairness, it's about feeling they belong, and also making sure people feel that they are part of, well, they're not losing their own identity, but they're part of the collective identity of the organisation. Then you've also got the reality that some lived experiences are not good because of people's characteristics. And let's take that might be an issue that is sadly not uncommon in organisations. There might be people in a workplace who've identified as LGBTI, and are they having as much of a good experience as others? If we take the interesting question with COVID, with more people working at home, what has that done to the position of women in the workplace? And when we look at the broader societal issues about how domestic work is distributed, those sorts of things. So there are lots of complexities there that we need to sort of face into. I think that we've got two things that we're looking at. One is just to go really hard on culture and inclusion, and in terms of doing all the good management things that we know we need to do. If we do that, getting fair processes, removing bias wherever we can, but also recognizing where things are not effective. So, the global evidence is that a lot of unconscious bias training as an intervention has not worked. Yes. So we need something else. It doesn't mean that unconscious bias doesn't exist, because it does. So does conscious bias. But we need to address that in the most effective way. So bringing evidence into that. And then I think there's always a risk with things like this, that the sort of the kurtosis, the neck and tail of the graph extends, and you've got really great practice here, but you've not addressed the bad practice here. And I think we want to keep doing the great things and making it true for everybody, but also be very intolerant of the bad things and be not afraid to call them out. So it's a really interesting time. And it all does come back, I believe, to empowered line managers. If you've got line managers who are following the CMI code, if you've got people who are skilled in dealing with people in the workplace, these problems get removed.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that you said call it out, because that's what we advise people. You have got to call out microaggressions when you see them, whether they happen to you or whether they happen to a colleague. And that is very important, because and the research actually supports this, that unless you call out the bad behavior, you won't change the bad behavior. And I think that if everybody does that, and it starts at the top, that goes some way toward creating that kind of inclusive culture.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I think there is also an element of being not self-critical, but just being alert and aware. So let's take an example. I think that I hope that all of us actually would now sort of we should go into a room with peers, whatever level, and it would be weird if it was everybody of the same gender. And what I think is happening now, probably well overdue, is people going into a room and saying, "Hang on, this looks like a very white meeting." Yeah. So I think being aware of that, and sometimes that will be the way it is, and those sorts of things. But being alert to what the workplace feels like.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very important thing, that you question and you do look around the room and say, who is in this room and are they diverse? Well, we could chat forever, but I want to give people the opportunity to ask questions. Our first question comes from Tristan. As COVID and associated waves of restrictions continue, how are you keeping your staff motivated and mentally well in the darker winter months?
Well, it's a great question, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because this second wave has come at really quite a different time of year, and that is important. You can't take for granted, and we've said this very much about what happened the first time, because it's completely different if you can go out even for your hour, as it was then, for a sunny walk, versus now. I certainly find that. So I think the again more of the same is actually the thing. More of what we know is the right stuff to do. So I think there is a an interesting feature of this environment, which is have people been. I actually think that this type of interaction on video conferencing and other things is actually less naturally hierarchical.
Yeah.
I think that's a feature, so we should embrace that.
We're all in the same size box.
So speaking to people more frequently. Now, there is an interesting question that I've been debating with some of my colleagues today, which is so one of the things that we measure is are people feeling pressure from micromanagement, and some people do say that, but is that also a phenomenon? I mean, that shouldn't be happening, but is that actually a phenomenon of the technology and the way we're working together? What might not have felt like micromanagement if someone cruised past your desk, when they call you and look at you and ask you what you're doing, might feel more like micromanagement. So there's some really quite interesting things there, but I think making sure that people are getting together, not just to talk about, not to be as a term someone wants to use with me, tasky. I can get tasky. Not tasky, but just let's just talk. Let's just have a reflect on how it's going.
Yeah,
will naturally emerge from that, and the creativity will emerge from that. So, keeping the contact, the isolation, feeling that it's not going to end, all those things are things that we can address that way, I think.
Absolutely. And having that, how are you and what are you doing to look after yourself? Now, there is another great question here from Julia. After you're 2 months out, she asks, how did you relaunch yourself? I'm a nurse. I've been working on the front line since March. I feel completely burnt out now, and it's affecting my health.
Yeah. Thanks, Julia. That's I and I've had this conversation, and I had this conversation with some colleagues now. I've been in a similar situation, and my experience is only my experience. So do take it in that spirit. But I think it's about being. I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but sort of kind to yourself. Actually, it's maintain yourself, right? If you're not, the phrase that someone uses, put your oxygen mask on first. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you won't be able to help the person in the seat next to you. So think really about what your limits are, how you want to come back. Don't do things too fast. Be aware that like everything, coming back to work, like weight loss, all those things, that it all, it's a more gradual process than one would probably like, but you will get there. Mm-hmm. And being very, again, it's a very important thing for everybody, I think, is having a sense of agency about yourself and how much can you control in your external environment, the external environment you're working in. And then the other thing I feel very strongly about is being alert to the fact that we get pressures from many directions. We get pressures from the workplace, managers, colleagues, customers. We get pressures from where we're living in our community, from neighbours and other things, and we get it from our families as well. And I feel very strongly making sure that all of those three things are in sync is important. Of which, if you asked me to put a bet on the thing that I would focus on first, it would be the immediate circle, the family circle, and making sure that is that is one that is comfortable for you. And actually, that's really that's something which we need to say COVID has caused a lot of difficulty over. Whether it's people that are not able to see parents because they're they're far away, or they're in care homes, or children, or whatever. So that's, we should factor that in as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer, and be kind to yourself is wonderful advice. Putting your own oxygen mask. Question here from Rob: with the level of skills required in the civil service, will there be an increase in the yearly training cap in terms of the number of days of training a year? And will we see a return to the Civil Service Staff College?
Ah, great, Rob. That's like a question I might have planted. So let me break that down. So I think it's really interesting. I think there is we talked about outputs and outcomes. So the outcome is, how do you get people to have the capability they need to be fulfilled in their current job and to get ready for whatever they might want to do next in 5-10 years time? So we hope that with things like success profiles, which describe what experience is required for a job, what you need to be successful, by looking at things like continuous professional development that we want to bring in, so more like other professions have, that we'll look at that. So, but time is important because there is a question about bandwidth. So this is a question that we're asking ourselves. Do you want to be realistic? And this is why there needs to be some coordination, because you could go out to the 12 functions, 40 professions, and say, tell us what everyone needs to know, and very quickly it will be chaos, and you'll be spending all your time training.
Yeah.
So really, it's a question of prioritization, and giving a bit of guidance on that, and working out what the right amount of training needs to be. And I think we just don't know that. We do, though, have a pretty good idea that people are doing less training than they want to do or should be doing.
And you're right, and technology will help that. Things like bite-sized learning will help that,
Yeah.
and of course the CPD, that little and often, and then apply it on the job, right? I think that's
Absolutely.
very valuable.
And how do we track it? So I think what we're hoping for is that everybody will have the tools to have a development plan, which allows them actually to go to their line managers as well and say, look, we agreed that I need to take this time off to do this thing, or I need this number of hours, or and the thing that we don't want to happen, which is you're doing this key bit of training, it's in the important non-urgent box, but it still needs to be done, and that you're not saying, no, this less important urgent thing is bumping someone out of it. So that's a really important thing. And the Civil Service Staff College. So I think the spirit of that, if you read the Ditchley speech, Rob, I think you'll find that's the spirit of that that's what we need to get to. Now, I think if you're building it from scratch, which is sort of what we're doing now, I'm not sure you build exactly the same thing as Sunningdale. What we're talking about is a virtual campus with different professions in government linked to their professional bodies outside government, sort of dotted around in this metaphorical space: security, digital, HR, finance, policy, operations, etc. Academies, all linked together and using the same language and the same way of describing what we expect in terms of development and career pathways. And that's what the curriculum document we're going to be publishing will show. But I think there is still a question about what is the right level of professional, of residential interaction and face-to-face training that we need, and that's something which I think will probably, when we're through COVID, I think that will still return very much have a place.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's a great answer. Now, this is our last question that we have time for, and it's actually one that's been synthesized, and it's a great question. A number of viewers are discussing the problem is that when we call out bad behavior, the person who is displaying the bad behavior often turns it around, and you end up being the one in the spotlight. Any thoughts on how to combat this?
Wow, it's a great. It's true well beyond the workplace, isn't it? That one. This comes down, I think, to several things about the importance of the culture of the organisation and of the team in which you're in. I have a general view that ultimately it never ends well for the people who exercise bad behaviour, including in particularly in management roles. The question is whether it will resolve itself before everyone else gets so fed up with it they leave. It's very. I'm going to defer on this one and say I think this is one where I need to come back with a link to what I think is a good guide to this. My own feeling is that not being afraid to call it out in the moment is the right thing to do.
Yes.
Now, what I realize is that I'm 53. I'll be 54 in April. It's easier for me to do that now. Would I have done that when I was 22 or 18 or even 32 or 42? I'm not sure. But the ability. But the thing, and maybe it's finding someone to talk to about it and say, how do you confront it? I think there's the impact of saying, I'm sorry. Why? I don't agree with you. Why did you say that?
Exactly. And, I did a panel on this earlier this week for Women in Tech conference on exactly this topic. And we discussed it. It isn't easy. It gets easier over time in your career. But some of the things you can do, you talk about the impact on you. Gee, that comment made
Absolutely.
me feel like this, because nobody can deny you your feelings. What you don't do is launch into attacking them, you stupid,
Absolutely.
homophobic or racist jerk, right? That's not going to get you far. But if you just say, that comment you made, I just wanted to share, this is how it made me feel. Maybe you can clarify why you said that. What did you mean by that? Right? And I think it's about putting it on the impact of their behavior on you or your colleague, and asking them something that, Rupert, you referred to earlier, to reflect on,
Yeah.
what did they mean by that? Why did they say that? That can be a good strategy, but it is always difficult.
One thing I don't know and whether you agree with this, but one thing I have found over time is that sometimes it is just about communication.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be because someone didn't understand the context you were operating in, or the pressures that were in the system, or they just didn't get it the first time. They may not have heard what you think you said or what you said. And so the clarification of, I said this, and did you get that, is also a useful way of looking at it. And the other is that people have different styles, and some people are less agreeable. That's just the way they are, and we should accept that. There's a limit, though, as to how much of it we'll accept. And some people are, I think, in terms of how they speak and their rhetoric, some people can sound a bit more oppositional than they actually mean to be. So another way of taking it is obviously talk about your feelings and not necessarily assuming an ill intent in what the person has been doing. They may be mortified to hear that that's how it's made you feel. And then that sort of can narrow down the set of things that we might have called bad behavior. But when we need to, nail it.
We do. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful to the viewers that are discussing this. Well, Rupert, thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful discussion. I could carry on forever, but we are out of time. I know everybody's enjoyed it very much. And do join me next week when we'll be discussing what business books are the favorite of the Dean of Henley Business School and one of the North's leading independent directors. See you then.